Hi.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you. Hello.
It's really nice to meet you too. I'm so glad the technology worked.
Yeah, I was super stressed because I mean with the whole time zone thing, I figured it would.
Yeah.
Yep, works just fine. So, I think we're just gonna wait like about 5 minutes and
Yeah.
then good to go. Yep.
Sounds good. Yeah, I've never joined an Instagram live, so I was like, how does this actually work?
Nor have I. I really hope that this works out fine. But yeah, I think it's gonna be all fine.
Fingers
Um,
crossed. So it's 6 o'clock where you are?
um, 5:58 to be like really precise. But yeah, in I'm sorry, I think you're a bit frozen right now.
Sorry, I think that just cut out.
That's okay. That's okay. Um, 2 more minutes, and yeah, I think we're good to go soon enough.
I'm just crossing my fingers for the Wi-Fi now.
Me too.
Oh, we'll just keep rejoining if worse comes to
Yes,
worse.
okay. Yeah, I think it's gonna be okay.
Oh. I always love watching like people join webinars and Instagram lives.
It's super nerve-wracking, but it's also like a really great feeling to know that you're gonna be talking to that many people. So
Yeah. And it's always nice to know that people are interested in, especially when it's topics like this. You're like, it's great that people are actually want to know.
right, yeah. I think just the way we've progressed and the way we're so open to talk about these things, I think it's really cool. So yeah.
Same.
Okay. A minute, and I think we can definitely begin.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, sure. So I think we're gonna get started out. It's 6. So hi everyone. I think we're just gonna start by introducing ourselves. My name is Arundhati, and I work at RutuChakra as a campaigns associate in the campaigns department. And today we're live with Scarlet Udaan. And Minnie, if you could just introduce yourself and talk about Scarlet Udaan a bit.
Hi, I'm Minnie. I work on the marketing team for Scarlet Udaan. We were set up this summer. We work mainly in advocacy and education around FGC, which is female genital cutting, for anyone that doesn't know. Yeah, we run webinars, we have a podcast, we're really active on social media with kind of educational content, and we run trainings on FGC for anyone interested.
Right. So I think FGC is such an important topic to talk about, especially in context with menstruation, because both of them tie into such essential aspects of women's health and reproductive rights in general. So yeah, I'm super excited for this, and I really hope we have a good conversation. For those of you who are viewing this live, please feel free to comment any questions you might have or ask us any questions you might have. We won't get back to it at that instant, but at the end, there's definitely going to be some time for us to answer your questions and hopefully you can get more clarity. So, yeah, let's get started with our conversation. So, Minnie, if you could tell us a little bit about what FGC is, why it's something that is so important for us to talk about, and just the general basics of it.
Yeah, so FGC covers kind of a wide variety of different practices. There's 4 types of FGC, and they vary from the external invisible part of the clitoris being cut off to like leaving only a small opening and kind of sealing over the skin over the entire genital area. It's a really important topic because it happens globally. A lot of people think it's kind of originating in and staying in a couple of regions that you probably would associate with it, but in reality it's prevalent in countries all over the world. Not illegal in a lot of countries. Lots of countries have no legislation around it. Every 11 seconds a girl or a woman undergoes the practice, so it's a lot more common than people think it is, and it can lead to a lot of kind of health complications later on in life. It can be practiced at a lot of ages for a lot of different reasons, but a lot of the health complications are to do with kind of menstrual health and reproductive health. Yeah, so that's kind of, it's really important to talk about as well, because it's not a particularly talked about topic, but it does affect a lot of women's lives. And just in terms of kind of knowing about it, so if you ever interact with people or would like to become an advocate, you kind of have the information.
Right. So yeah, I completely agree with everything you said about FGC, and it is very scary to think of how prevalent it still is, because you think that such an archaic sounding practice is, at least at this point, outdated and is something that just seems so barbaric in people's minds, but apparently not. And that's something that we can connect so well to menstruation as well, because when you think about menstruation, you think that we're a very forward society. You think that there's no stigma around it, there's no complications with it. But the reality of the situation is there are so many people who still consider it an unclean or a dirty practice. There's still so many people who have such old beliefs about menstruation, and it affects almost half the world's population. But there's a severe lack of access to resources, and there's so many problems that people still aren't aware about. So I think that's something that is very common to both.
Yeah. So why do you think it's like important to talk about menstruation and like the biology behind it and like the inequalities that it kind of creates or perpetuates?
Okay, so I'm going to start with one part of that, the biology of menstruation. It's kind of scary almost how most people just don't know the basic biology behind how it works and what a common process it is as such. And the thing is, understanding the biology behind it, behind what happens when you're menstruating, is the first step to making sure that there's less of a stigma around it. Because once people understand, hey, this is something that happens in people's bodies, this is something that happens to a lot of people in my life, and this is how it happens, this is a very normal process to go through. That's step one for people to understand as such that it isn't an abnormal, dirty thing. So I think that's why the biology of menstruation is something that we really do need to understand, and something that there should be a very open conversation about. And as for talking about menstruation in general, again, destigmatizing the topic is what makes it something, is what makes progress in that field possible, right? Once we get rid of social stigmas, once we, again, understand how normal the process is, we can move on to making sure that the people who need the facilities for menstruation and the people whose lives it affect, we can help them more. So yeah, I think that's why it's so important to talk about menstruation very openly and very clearly. And in the same regard, I'd like to ask you again, why do you think it's so important to promote a conversation specifically about FGC and its importance?
Yeah, so I think with FGC, it's really important to have a conversation because it breaks down a lot of stigmas. People think it's kind of, as you were saying, sort of a practice that's really hard to hear about, and we don't think it's as common as it is. Every 11 seconds is a really scary statistic. It's something that as an organisation we really like people to know, because I think it kind of brings forward the prevalence. And in terms of prevalence, 98% of women and girls in Somalia will have FGC at some point in their lives. And they estimate that there's kind of, you know, hundreds of thousands of girls in Europe and the US. It doesn't just stay in kind of the African regions people expect. In Asia, they estimate about 150 million girls, and these aren't insignificant numbers. And in terms of the health complications and things, I think when looking at like menstruation as well and the effects these things have on women's lives, with the complications, these are long-term things that impact women and girls kind of for their life and the opportunities they have. A lot of girls leave education as a result of the impact FGC can have on their menstruation. They think it can take about, some people have reported kind of 14-day periods that obviously by the time it's done, you're kind of starting that cycle again. And with a lack of kind of menstrual hygiene and facilities, that can put a lot of girls out of education. Because you can't really go to school in that much pain. With type 3, a lot of women have reported that the blood can't get out of their body, and they have to go to hospital kind of every month to get it drained, which is obviously incredibly painful. For a lot of people, that would place a financial drain on them and their family. Yeah, I think it's just a really important thing to talk about because it affects more people than we think and in different ways than we think. And like menstruation, it's not just the moment that it happens that is impactful. It's the long-term consequences on equality and access and prospects that make it really kind of a vital thing for everyone to be aware of.
I completely agree. That holds so true for menstruation as well. It isn't just an issue that we need to talk about in the moment. It's something that people should know about from a reasonably young age, and something that they should understand. Again, it impacts pretty much a lot of people that we know in our lives. And that understanding and destigmatization at an early age itself, that's something that I think is so important again about menstruation. And I noticed you mentioned a lot about some stigmas surrounding FGC and sort of misconceptions surrounding it. So could you sort of shed more light upon those?
Yeah, so a lot of people aren't aware of the different forms. They think they kind of have a one type view of it, whereas in reality it comes in kind of, as I said, 4 types. But the type 4 is kind of all other harmful procedures for the female genitals. So that can be piercing, pricking, scraping. So it comes in kind of loads of different forms. Its consequences come in loads of different forms. Every woman will experience it completely differently. We had a webinar with a survivor where she mentioned that as a result of her cutting, she couldn't have children, and her sister was cut on the same day by the same woman and has a number of children. The consequences are completely different. A lot of people think it's a cultural thing or a religious thing, whereas in reality there is no kind of religious book out there that says this is a necessary practice. I think in terms of menstruation as well, kind of a similar dynamic that a lot of people think of it about as cleanliness and hygiene, you know, like the clean aspect, but it has so many negative health repercussions, and it has so many kind of harmful repercussions that there isn't really a good reason. In reality, it's a violation of people's rights, human rights. It's recognised by the UN as a complete violation of human rights. Yeah, there's kind of lots of reasons people think it happens. Tradition, customs, peer pressure plays a kind of large role in a lot of societies. You're seen as unclean for having not undergone the practice, which kind of places a bit of kind of social pressure on the family. But in reality, there are no health benefits at all. It's kind of perpetuated that, oh, there must be some, but there are no health benefits to the practice. So a lot of it is just kind of myths around it. But yeah, there is no kind of foreseeable benefits. And yeah, it's just a really harmful practice, kind of long term and short term, but not one that a lot of people know about. So do you think that with kind of menstruation education for people, like with FGC, is kind of key to bringing that sort of forward and improving it?
Most definitely. So I think the most essential step to promoting menstrual equity, and in your case to promoting awareness about FGC, is education. So I mentioned this when I was talking in the beginning as well, but education is sort of like the step one that you have to take to combat any of these issues. When it comes to menstruation, it isn't enough to just simply go to a bunch of menstruators and give them the resources they need and expect the whole issue to go away after that. It goes much deeper. You need to be able to tell them. You need to be, first of all, be able to tell them how to actually use the resources you're giving them. And then comes the whole aspect of removing all the stigmas surrounding menstruation and making sure that people who menstruate, the rest of the other aspects of their lives aren't affected by the fact that they're menstruators. And when I say that, I specifically refer to the fact that a lot of people still think of it as a taboo topic. They still think of it as something that's sort of dirty or unclean. And many girls, when they get their periods at a younger age, they become sort of shunned. People in their own family treat them as something that's disgusting just because they're having their periods. A lot of them are forced to drop out of school and forsake their education just because they got their periods. A lot of women don't know about their menstruation till they actually start menstruating. A lot of women don't know how to identify symptoms when it comes to irregular periods, extremely heavy bleeding, underlying symptoms that could be related to a menstrual disorder. So again, I think that education is the key to combating poor menstrual hygiene management or period poverty. I think it's the most essential step. And I think you definitely agree to that when it comes to FGC as well.
Yeah, I think with FGC, one of the big issues is that a lack of education kind of perpetuates its prevalence. A lot of the time it happens to young girls. And if you're not educating their families, if you're not educating on the potential risk factors, as I said, it varies for each individual. The mother might be absolutely fine after hers, like bar physically still able to menstruate, still able to have children, but in reality, the lack of education means people don't know the risks they're taking for themselves or their children. And also being able to support people, obviously a very emotionally traumatic experience, physically traumatic, without proper education on the topic. It limits the amount to which society can support these women, like before and after, help prevent the practice, but also help people come to terms with what's happened to them emotionally, work through it, gain physical medical treatment if it's required. So I think almost a lack of education perpetuates it and leaves people ill-informed about something that's so harmful. It really should be something people are educated on, and as a violation, as I've said, the UN say it is as a violation of your human rights, and it feels like, as you would probably agree with menstruation, anything that is related to people's human rights to live happy lives, live functional lives, we should all really be aware of, even if it doesn't kind of actively affect us as an individual, so that we can help people going through those things as much as prevent them in the future.
Again, that completely, like you said, resonates with menstruation as well. I think that recognition that promoting menstrual equity is basically the same as promoting human rights is a realization that a lot of people have to come to. And again, the most basic thing that a lot of us should understand about menstruation is that it has so much prevalence in our daily lives. And educating people about it, helping as many people as you can understand why there are still issues related to menstruation, helping them get a deeper understanding of how you can help propagate menstrual equity amongst the people in and around your life. I think that's something that all of us should know how to do. And yeah, I think what I really do want to ask you is, what would you say is sort of the single most important thing that people, even if they don't work for organizations like RutuChakra and Scarlet, what is something they can do to sort of combat the issue of FGC?
I think I'd say have the conversations with people. Sanya, our founder, one of the things that inspired her to found the organisation was when she realised how few of the people she went to university with had actually heard of the practice or properly understood it. And I think one of the most effective things we can do is it can be an uncomfortable conversation, but to have it with people, to try and educate them, to try and educate them on the prevalence, on the practice, on the effect it can have on people, which is a really hard conversation. But whether it's your parents, a friend, maybe you are in university and you're in a society and you want kind of to tell them a bit about it, just to kind of have those difficult conversations so that you can help facilitate everyone being a little bit more educated. And then when people do come in contact with survivors, when people do kind of come in contact with the practice, they can approach it in a more educated way and in a way that makes survivors most comfortable. And it is a hard conversation. It's a bit uncomfortable. It can make people feel a bit, unpleasant, or like they don't have a right to kind of discuss it. But I think it's just important to kind of ask people, what do you know about FGC? Have you heard of it? Are you aware of like how prevalent it is? And even just do some research into different organisations that you can support. There's loads out there, and even if it's not, it doesn't have to be like financial support for some of the charities. It can be kind of sharing a post on Instagram that kind of educates maybe 5 people that see it. Just the hard conversations can actually have a big impact on a lot of people.
Yeah, so I think, again, having a conversation, like I've emphasized so many times, is something that we really don't look at as much as we do the financial aspect, maybe of funding products for people when it comes to menstruation. So, and the thing is that difficult conversation to have about menstruation, it starts at the very grassroots levels. That means making sure that maybe the male members in your family are as educated about menstruation, because it isn't an issue that is restricted to one gender per se. It's something that a lot of people should know about. It also means calling out practices that just propagate more stigmas related to menstruation wherever you are. So, for example, in school for the past 10 years or so, I've always noticed that maybe it's just a thing here, but there's such a sort of silence surrounding menstruation. It isn't talked about as openly as it should. And if one of us has to get a pad or something, we're sort of encouraged to wrap it up in newspaper and hide it when we go to bathrooms. And I think it's really the small things like that, understanding that, whether or not you think there's a stigma, there are small habits in, like, you notice in and around you that really just help, push malpractices and harmful ideals. So again, definitely, I think having that conversation with as many people as you can is something that's so important.
Yeah. So what would you say is kind of the most important thing in terms of having that conversation about kind of menstrual health? What would you say is sort of the key thing you'd want to get across to people?
Well, most definitely the one thing I wish people would understand is just how, like, menstruation is basic biology. I really do think that most people don't understand that. It's not this sort of weird thing that happens when a girl hits a certain age. I think that's something that people really should keep in mind. It happens to a lot of people, and I want them to understand that, look, this is the biology behind it, and this is what's going to happen. There's nothing wrong with it. And I think there should be way more of a conversation surrounding menstrual health as well. So I think more people need to be educated about menstrual disorders and the symptoms related to the same, and how to identify them and how to keep yourself safe. In general, I think women's reproductive health should be be a priority with all people. And finally, I've been talking about menstruation from a very one-sided aspect as a women's issue. I think another thing that I've learned, especially as a person who works at RutuChakra, is that menstruation is an issue across genders in that everyone needs to be having a conversation about it, but it also affects trans people, it also affects non-binary people, it also affects agender people. And I think that aspect of menstruation is something that I'm only just learning to discuss, but I think it's super important. And when I have a conversation with menstruation about people, I think that's one thing I want to emphasize on a bit more.
Yeah. So is there any kind of existing educational framework for menstrual health? Like, is there a legal requirement for schools to teach kind of a particular aspect of it or a particular amount about it, or is it kind of up to specific, like, is it up to the family to kind of educate people entirely?
So I think when it comes to menstruation, most people sort of see their mothers as the person who is going to give them that information, as the person who is sort of responsible for introducing them to the whole topic of menstruation and to the whole concept of periods. Um, from my perspective as a current student, I did learn about menstruation from a purely biological aspect. But I think, as such, the conversation about the stigma surrounding menstruation, I don't see a lot of education in that field. Um, I think when it comes to schools and their specific roles in talking about menstruation, I think that, again, the basic biology of it should be explained, but it should also be, I think there's a lot more detail that needs to go into, again, disorders, the fact that non binary people menstruate, just certain aspects about menstruation beyond the fact that it's a biological process. And again, I think most people learn from their parents at the first instance about menstruation. There is a lot of change for in the field of menstruation when it comes to education. And yeah, I think that's something that I really do hope to see. I hope that young girls and boys are taught about menstruation in much more detail at a much earlier age. And
Yeah.
when it comes to FGC, what would you say the educational landscape is like as such?
Um, I am obviously from the UK and it was never mentioned in school. It wasn't something that we ever spoke about. One of the things that can be really important with FGC is not only educating people in general, but educating people in kind of healthcare and education professions to be able to recognize it, to recognize when it might be happening, and to know what to do in those circumstances. Obviously, specifically type 3 can have a huge impact on the type of reproductive health services that you would receive, that you would require. So it's really important that nurses, midwives, doctors are all educated on what it is, the effects it can have, how to have that conversation with people if they encounter it. The same with teachers and educators. It often happens to girls at kind of a time where they would be in education, and for teachers to notice the signs of that, to notice if maybe girls aren't coming to school for long periods of time on a kind of recurrent cycle that might be coinciding with when they menstruate, and due to that being so painful and difficult, them not being able to come to school, and just training all of those professionals in how to deal with those conversations, and I think also just in general educating the public on what it is, how it happens, and how they can approach that, because you could encounter FGC in your workplace, a colleague might have undergone it in university, a friend, in school, a friend. And I think just general education around how to approach those conversations and education really helps to create a better understanding. And I think for survivors, one of the most important things can be, even as I imagine as a survivor, one of the things that would be appreciated is even for people just to know what you've gone through and kind of even just the biological, physical aspect, and to have that be appreciated. And I think education is really kind of key to that?
Right. Yeah, I think honestly that's an aspect that I didn't think of it too much, as in survivors and the education needed to know how to offer them the support that they would need both mentally and physically. And speaking as a person who really does try their best to make sure to be an activist of sorts in whatever field they can, I think FGC is something that I didn't particularly know about in as much detail as I should have. I really do think it's such a prevalent issue. And coming to that, how do you think people can begin personally educating themselves about FGC? Because, like you said, it isn't given nearly importance as it should be. And at least at this point of time, I think it's more important for people to take it into their own hands. So, how do you think people can make an effort to educate themselves about FGC?
Yeah, so there are brilliant. Obviously, as an organisation, our Instagram, we have a content team that work really hard to research this and provide kind of sort of really accessible information about it. Not kind of lots of science or any of that, but just kind of the core things you need to know. So that would be a great place to start. The Cruel Cat is a fabulous film documentary made where it really goes into a lot of detail and not just about the practice, but also looking at kind of the cultural aspects, communities affected and things like that. And I think starting from those places, the Cruel Cat is a really accessible way to do it. It can be quite hard watching, obviously not an easy topic, but it can be a really good place to start. Yeah, it can be a really good place to start, just kind of educating yourself and getting a greater appreciation. And I think it's also kind of an easier way to do that than maybe wading through lots of literature. But kind of however you learn, there's probably a way to learn about FGC in that way. What would you say is a good place to start with kind of the same ideas but with menstrual health?
So, I think considering the number of organizations that work in the space of menstrual equity, I think a simple Instagram search is more than enough to tell you a lot of things you need to know about menstruation. So, organizations like ours that actively strive to promote menstrual equity put out content very, very often regarding how you can help people around you who menstruate. And they put out a lot of content also related to sort of the nuances of menstruation that you might not know about beyond a basic perspective. So I think definitely maybe make an effort to check out a couple of organizations and just see what they're saying. And beyond that, again, maybe mass media. So maybe watch a movie or two, a documentary, read a book if you're up to it, just to see what the scope of menstruation still is in the world right now. And honestly, it doesn't take all that much effort to both learn about menstruation and have a conversation about it. Um, an article or two is more than enough to understand all the basics. And then from there, if you just keep up with a couple of organizations and read something that may come your way once in a while related to menstruation, you're good to go. So I think that's pretty much everything related to educating yourself about menstruation.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Is there any legal framework around how to protect women in terms of period poverty and menstrual equality? Like, is that something that is sort of entering the legal framework, or is that something more overlooked?
Right. So here specifically, I think that there isn't enough of a legal framework, or rather, the people who um, frame the laws related to menstruation in India don't have a deep enough understanding of what people really require. So even if there isn't a tampon tax anymore, that isn't enough. It's still, I think, what a legal framework can achieve that social activists really don't have enough of a say in is sort of regulating the price of basic commodities that people would need related to menstruation. And another thing that the government can do is make sure that there's access to plenty of public toilets with sanitary napkins in them, access to water and soap in all households for people who menstruate. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is menstruation and sort of making sure that public health is a priority go hand in hand. So while there are mentions of menstruation in legal frameworks, and this isn't just in India, in countries across the world, I don't think there's enough of an emphasis on just how basic a process it is. And similarly, what would you say is the sort of existing legal framework related to FGC, and what can be achieved in a legal context for FGC?
So obviously it varies quite a lot across the globe. For example, the UK has a law against FGC, however, it's very rarely prosecuted. So that can be the same for quite a few countries where the legal framework exists but isn't really put into action very effectively, which obviously there's no point in having a law without the law doing what it's supposed to. There's areas of America where it's still legal. A lot of the time it's becoming increasingly performed by healthcare professionals. And that type of thing is something that could very easily be helped by a legal system that said that medical professionals couldn't do this. So for example, in India, it's actually, there is no law against FGC. The Indian government say they don't require one because it isn't something practiced in India. However, there are specific communities in which it is actually very prevalent, where up to 80% of the members of that community have undergone it. So I think sometimes legal frameworks can be helpful, even in just accepting its existence. Like in the Indian context, the acceptance that it does happen and that it isn't okay and that there should be something done. But obviously the legal framework varies greatly depending on the country. But kind of the global UN consensus would be that it isn't really acceptable, that it does breach human rights, and that it is something that as a global society we should aim to eradicate. But I think a large part of that is, if not just legal frameworks, but ones that are effective and written in a way that they can be effective. The UK, obviously, having a law is brilliant, but it not really prosecuting anyone isn't great. So I think it's just as important to have a legal framework as it is to have an effective legal framework that works.
Right. Yeah, that reflects for menstruation as well. I didn't really talk about it before, but what you said about the consequence of certain laws that exist and how harshly those consequences are enforced is very important. I think there needs to be a much stricter legal framework for even the consequences of maybe preventing a young girl from going to school because she's menstruating, as an example. I think as the government of the country, they have a lot of influence on the general public's opinion. And I really think there should be more of an effort from a legal side to not only provide resources that people might need when it comes to menstruation or FGC, but also to raise awareness about issues in both fields and to sort of make sure that even if they do discuss those issues, the implementation is actually done on a very wide scale.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, the government can have a huge impact on the wider view of a practice, and the wider acceptance of something as being unacceptable. And I think even if having a legal framework in place prevents one family from undergoing FGC or prevents one girl from not going to school because of her period, then it's a law that is worth having, and worth kind of working towards. Yeah. So do you think that the legal framework and like the currently existing kind of legal frameworks, do you think they have made a difference, or do you think that they've been kind of just sort of token policies that haven't really done much?
I think in certain areas there is a definite difference. So maybe, again, on a global scale, for example, removing the tax on sanitary products in certain cities, certain states, that has made at least a little bit of a difference. And I think that people are headed in the right direction. But again, having a legal framework isn't of enough use if it's done in a very mismanaged way. So even if you do cut taxes and reduce the prices for these commodities, you still need policies in place to make sure that these commodities are definitely reaching the people you intend for them to reach. You need to have frameworks in place to make sure that these people are educated about the products that they're using. You need to have frameworks in place to make sure that they are educated about all the difficulties surrounding menstruation, or in your case, FGC. So while there is an impact, it has been done in a very, the frameworks have been created in a very haphazard way. And I think strengthening those frameworks is what will make more of a concrete impact for the people who need it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it is really important to consider who a framework is made for and if it is working for those individuals. Because obviously in the case of FGC, legal framework could range from how it is to be dealt with in hospitals to the practice itself to education around it. And I think it's really important to come up with policies that target specific kind of nuanced areas, and then the effective implementation of those practices so that they actually do what they're supposed to do.
Right. So again, same here. I think there should be a very sort of comprehensive and extensively detailed framework to target specific areas related to menstruation, menstrual hygiene management, period poverty, menstrual disorders, and specifically when it comes to menstruation, laws that also protect people who dispose of our menstrual waste for us. So I think an extremely comprehensive policy is the future that we need. And in the meantime, I think that something that organizations like both of ours can do is sort of work to spread this information, but also see what the scope is for working with the government in our countries to improve issues in our respective areas. So, in that regards, what do you think is a very sort of impactful thing that your organization has done in the field of FGC, and what is something that you think you can do which would make even more of an impact?
Yeah, so our organisation, we're dedicated to kind of raising awareness and educating. I think one of the best things there's a couple of things. One of the things I think has really helped is we've had a lot of collaborations with organisations like yours and others that really help to get the word out globally and to people that maybe haven't engaged with the issue up until this point, which is really valuable to get that kind of, I suppose the expression, we plant that seed in someone's head that this is an issue they should care about. So that's been really great. We held a webinar with a survivor, which I think was brilliant. We had over 100 people sign up to the webinar with Hoda, and that webinar was amazing. She's a survivor who now lives in the UK and is really open about her work in advocating for the end to the practice, but also her personal experiences. And I think that was really impactful. All the feedback we got around that webinar was that people were looking at things from a completely different perspective, that people were looking at things in a much, having heard a survivor talk about their personal experience in their life is something really impactful that kind of brings it out of sort of the abstract and into kind of looking a person in the eye and going, oh wow, you've really been through a lot. I think going forward, for us, it would just be reaching more people, having that conversation with more people, engaging with more survivors. For us, engaging with survivors also really helps to keep us going along the right path, make sure that we're representing FGC in a way that people having undergone the practice are happy with, that they feel does reflect their experience and saying things that they feel really need to be said. So I think just going further in educating people in a way that is effective and productive. What would you say in terms of your organisation and the most kind of important thing you've done to this point and like where you'd like to see that go?
So the thing about RutuChakra is This might sound a bit cheesy, but I honestly believe pretty much everything we do in there is super impactful. But from another perspective that I think is very important about us is that we're completely youth run. So it's just a bunch of teenagers who work on ideas about how to make menstrual equity more of a reality in this world. And I think because of that fact, we're very, very passionate about what we do. And we really strive to make sure that that conversation about periods is something that's almost fun and something that's very easy for people to talk about. It isn't like a heavy, serious topic that we sort of promote. It's more of something that people go through on a daily basis, and I think that reflects a lot in the activities that we carry out, the campaigns that we execute, which um, I don't think is something that I see everywhere else. It isn't a heavy topic, and we sort of managed to bring that transformation, which I personally think is very impressive. And as you said, webinars, campaigns, activities. A webinar that really stands out in my mind is with an organization called Transcend that we had recently. And we spoke to two trans men and asked for their experiences with menstruation and dysmorphia. And I remember towards the end of the webinar, a person who I think was slightly older sort of congratulated us and told us in all their experiences in working in the field of menstrual equity, they had never really come across an organization that brought these fresh perspectives into it. So in this case, trans menstruation. So I think both RutuChakra and Scarlet and youth-run organizations in general talk about issues that need to be talked about, but they also never shy away from aspects that aren't brought up in conversation enough. And they also manage to do it in a way that really engages their audience. And I think in the future, I really want to continue doing that. I really want to make sure that like more and more people just talk about menstruation just because, we're making an effort to make it an extremely easy thing to talk about. And I also really hope that more people our age start taking notice of the issues that they need to, because I think that we're really the ones who have the most impact and the most power when it comes to them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think what you said about being a youth run organisation is really important. Obviously I think all of us are under the age of kind of 21 in our organisation and sort of span the globe, and I think that gives a lot of power to new perspectives, different ideas, different ways of doing things, different ways of seeing things that variety and that youth aspect really provides, which is brilliant. So what would you say that the people watching this webinar, this Instagram live, sorry, can do to raise awareness and contribute to helping people that menstruate?
So again, the most important thing that anyone can do for menstruation at the grassroots level is just talk about it. So that means making sure that everyone in your life knows about menstruation, knows about the complications surrounding menstruation, and honestly, don't be ashamed of your periods. That's the most easy thing you could do. So if somebody sort of makes a joke about how you're having mood swings because it's that time of the month, and they sort of make jokes targeting menstruation, it's a really simple thing to do to sort of stop them at that point in time and say, hey, that isn't done. That's not something that's cool. And then talking to people in your household. If you have people who help out in your household who are maybe from a lower income background than you are, make sure that the salary that you're giving those people takes into account the fact that they might be a menstruator or there are people in their family who are menstruators. So just really simple things, making sure that you have a conversation, making sure that if you hear somebody saying something that just promotes the stigma further, cutting them down at that point in time, and making sure that the people around you have access to the same resources that you do, because you guys are both menstruators in the end. I think that's the most basic, simple thing you can do. It's super easy. Just talk to people and make sure they're taken care of. That's it. And I think on a similar wavelength, what do you think that the people watching this live can do for FGC?
I think one of the key things is being open to educating yourself and being educated by others. It's a topic a lot of people find uncomfortable. A lot of people think kind of, if it doesn't affect me, I don't have to know. But I think being open to being educated, being open to reading news articles you find on it, following pages that advocate for an end to FGC and to support survivors, and making sure that you have that awareness and spread that opportunity to educate yourself further among your friends, your relatives, and I think just kind of making sure you don't close yourself off to it based off it being something that doesn't affect you or you don't really want to talk about it. It is a really hard practice to learn about. One of the things we do as an organisation is kind of check in on ourselves and make sure that working in the field of FGC, kind of we're all okay. And I think we all understand that it's a hard topic, but I think it's appreciating that it's a very hard thing to live through for a lot of people and a real challenge in a lot of people's lives, and being open to educating yourself on that and others and opening yourself up to discussions, I think is really key.
Right, definitely. And yeah, it all ties back down to the one thing, having that conversation with as many people as you can, making sure that you're heard, making sure that like you're as open about it as you can possibly be. I think that's something that definitely applies to both RutuChakra and Scarlet, and both menstruation and FGC. It's super important. It's super easy as well. And I think the perspective that I've gained from working in an organization that deals with periods is such an important one. The fact that I am surrounded by people who don't shy away from the conversation at all, it just it makes me pretty hopeful about the fact that we're really improving as a generation, and I think that holds true for you as well.
Yeah, completely. When I started working for Scarlet Udaan, I didn't even know half of what I know now about FGC. And I think it really helps to see the number of people and the growing number of people that want to engage with our organisation and that do want to they are hopeful and they are excited about the prospect of helping in any way they can with this issue. And I think I completely agree that it is a really special thing to get to watch organisations like ours and the enthusiasm and kind of the hopefulness around what we do.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing gaining that sort of knowledge and that passion for fields like these. I think that's super important, and I think that really it is. We really do make a very substantial change to the world from where we work, and yeah, I think that's amazing. So
yeah, agreed completely.
yeah. Also, keeping in mind that we don't have too much time in this live, I think I'm just gonna open up the possibility to any questions from people who are currently watching the live or anything like related to our organizations or how you can help. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask right now.
No question is a bad question.
Definitely, yeah. I really do want to say that because like typically when I do lives and webinars, not lives, this is my first live, but when we do webinars and stuff like that, I think people are so hesitant to ask us stuff. But I mean, we're all here in the spirit of education and having a conversation. So yeah, if anyone has anything to say, that would be great. Okay. I don't think there are any questions, but that's okay. I think once we publish the live, I'm pretty sure that people are gonna ask us about stuff. And even if not, I think this was just a really great opening conversation for both of us.
Completely agreed, yeah.
Okay, cool. So if there are no questions and if there's nothing else, I think we can go ahead and end this live because we're pretty much done with many topics. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about or mention?
No, just thank you so much for the opportunity to kind of speak on these topics, and thank you so much for everything that you said. It was really informative, it was really helpful, and it was really inspiring just to know that there's an organisation that are as passionate as you guys about an issue that is so important and that affects kind of so many people, and it was just really great to see. So thank you so much.
I completely my sentiments exactly. I think it's so amazing that you guys are doing the work you do. And honestly, it isn't a topic that is talked about nearly enough as it should be. And just seeing that there's somebody who's coming here and talking about it as openly as you are, it's really inspiring. And you guys are going to make a great impact with what you're doing. And yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to end the live, and thank you to everyone who watched.